Osama bin Laden quickly emerged as a prime suspect in this attack, and Senator Orrin Hatch says intelligence officials told him people on at least one of yesterday's airplanes appear to have been associated with Osama bin Laden. U.S. officials have long feared what bin Laden might do. Here's ABC's Brian Ross with more.
Commercial airlines have been a part of many of the terrorist schemes tied to today's prime suspect, Osama bin Laden. According to federal court records filed by prosecutors in New York, terrorists working for bin Laden have often received training as pilots, some with U.S. pilots' licenses for large jets. In fact, some pilots say the turn the second plane seems to have made in hitting the World Trade Center would be difficult for an amateur to carry out.
I think we have to start looking for people who were trained to fly these things, people who knew what they were doing, because no pilot would ever fly in and destroy everybody.
As for bin Laden, after tracking him through his cell phone for several years, American intelligence officials reportedly lost track of him last year.
People at NSA told me that they had been able to eavesdrop on Osama bin Laden for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden it all went silent. They weren't able to track him anymore.
Federal prosecutors say bin Laden has a pattern of making good on his threats, and just 3 weeks ago, the Middle East Broadcasting Company reported the latest warning from bin Laden and his followers that the coming weeks would bear significant surprises during which American and Israeli interests worldwide would be targeted.
Men must send their sons to the battlefields and the fighting quarters so that they can be prepared militarily for the religion of Muhammad to triumph.
That was 3 weeks ago in the Afghan desert. Brian Ross, ABC News, New York.
We are going to turn now to pictures of the search and rescue operations underway at this moment at the site of the collapsed World Trade Center towers, as close to ground zero as our crews can get, where hundreds, perhaps thousands of emergency workers are braving extraordinarily dangerous conditions to fight fires and to search for any signs of life. We have heard reports that a number of survivors have been, in fact, pulled from the rubble. Other reports we've been getting in are that people were actually trapped inside some of that rubble and were using cell phones to call 911, to call for rescuers, to call for help. As you can see, an eerie scene in lower Manhattan. There is no electricity in much of this area. The area is lit by portable floodlights that they have brought down. Whole blocks worth of bulldozers and trying to clear away this wreckage. It could take weeks, however, they say, to find out the exact number of victims in this disaster. We're going to Bill Blakemore, who is down at the ground zero where the crews are working so diligently, so hard to try and find any victims, any survivors. Bill, what kind of progress are they making?
We haven't heard of any other than 2 or 3 people being pulled from the rubble so far. There have been a number of the search and rescue workers who've worked their way back up here after their shift ended, covered with dust, who've talked about how depressing it is to try to dig through 10 feet of ash and rubble and then just find another bit of metal and then have to start all over again, finding nothing. The really sobering thought, of course, Elizabeth, is the fact that down there at the end of the street is where all of the bodies are lying. We don't know how many it is, that people are saying could be in the tens of thousands.
This can often be a very delicate task in cases like this. The wreckage itself could collapse at any moment. How difficult a job is this, and how hard is it to even get close to some of this wreckage?
Well, first of all, a couple of buildings around the edge of it are still burning, and we can see some of the smoke still piling up from some of those fires. Some of that, of course, is also dust from some of the demolition workers. They're trying to get some of the debris cleared away. So they've got that difficulty. They've also got the difficulty of the fact that the trade towers seem to have completely disintegrated, virtually completely disintegrated as they fell down upon themselves. There's almost nothing left of any of the floors. So they have a great density of wreckage as well.
All right, Bill Blakemore, thank you so much for that update down at ground zero at what was the World Trade Centers and what is now the scene of a massive crime scene and a terrible national tragedy. It was United Airlines Flight 93, and passenger Mark Bingham was able to call his mother on a cell phone from a locked bathroom to tell her that the plane was being hijacked. Bingham's mother, Alice Hoglund, spoke earlier with Peter Jennings.
He said, "I just wanted to let you know that I love you." He was repeating that the same thing he had told Kathy a moment before. I told him, "We love you, Mark," and he said, "I'm on a flight Flight 93, United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, and there are 3 guys that have taken over the flight, and they say they have a bomb. And I'm calling you from the airphone on the plane, meaning not his cell phone, I guess. I found out since that he was sitting in the last part of first class and that the flight was fairly light, not very many passengers, 45 people aboard. So he may well be able to take a proactive part in that, and he intended to do is target. I certainly hope so anyway.
Ms. Hoagland, I hate interviews like this at this moment, and I'm sure you are suffering in ways that we cannot imagine. Did your son say anything else to you about the circumstances on board the flight?
No, I wasn't able to be. He was cut off. Can you hear me all right?
I can indeed.
The plane, the phone went dead after a few seconds. I got the impression that he was being distracted badly by something going on around him. I didn't hear anything except the sort of confusion. I didn't hear any explosions, any yelling, just voices, and then he seemed quite distracted about being a quite calm voice, so was a very close fellow, and then repeated that he loved us. He emphasized to me that what he was telling me was true. I told him I believed him, that we loved him, and the phone went dead.
Terrible, terrible news from the mother of Mark Bingham, one of the passengers on board one of the 4 commercial airline jets that were hijacked this morning. Several of those passengers on many of those airplanes were, in fact, able to use their cell phones. Many of them were reported on the phone when they called loved ones that they had been hijacked. Many of them had been herded to the back of the plane. They reported to loved ones that hijackers had, in many cases, attacked, stabbed flight attendants with knives that they had somehow managed to bring on board, something that is now going to be, the FBI will investigate as a tremendous security breach. That later on, in one case, the pilot of the aircraft was taken to the back of the airplane, according to some reports, but several people were able to, in those terrifying moments, when I'm sure they knew something very terrible was on its way to happening, were able to call somebody, loved ones, on their cell phone and talk with them. In fact, there's been a lot of talk already on why on earth we didn't have any clue, apparently, that these attacks were going to happen. Something this well orchestrated took an enormous amount of planning and preparation by whoever is behind this attack. And there's already a lot of finger pointing going on about why we didn't get any sort of clue this was about to happen.
A lot of the intelligence professionals are saying the United States is the best in the world at technical intelligence gathering, scooping up information from the sky, in effect, but not so good nowadays in human intelligence. That is, people on the ground, informants on the ground. And I think that's going to be a lot of what you're hearing in coming days here. And in fact, the way we fly in this country could change dramatically. Security, that sort of thing, that changes that could be happening at the airports? Security is going to change once they resume flights, which could be as early as noon today. There's certainly, you won't be able to check in bags at curbside anymore. There's going to be a lot more security all along the way, including some random ID checks. All right, Barry Serafin, thank you for checking in with us from our nation's capital. Recapping, any update, any more survivors found?
Not that we know of so far. The big problem is an enormous amount of dust and the fact that they still cannot get the fires out. We can see against the dark night sky the smoke coming from 2 of the large buildings that are just to the west of the trade towers. They've been burning all day. We were watching them burn from before noon today. They've tried to get up into the buildings next to them to get streams of water onto them. But they're still having an awful lot of trouble with that heat, and the heat also in the very center of the base of where the 2 trade towers were. You can probably see some of the smoke down at the end of the street, very often obscuring what little of the wreckage we can see from here, the twisted wreckage. But the search and rescue operations are beginning to move around the periphery. We're beginning to see some of the rubble moved out by front-end loaders in some of the trucks. And every couple of hours, another shift of firemen comes past us, completely covered with dust.
And Bill, how quickly was the city and the National Guard, I'm assuming or supposing, how quickly were they able to get all of those bulldozers and backhoes that are so necessary to move this massive amount of wreckage?
We saw that all accumulating by late afternoon. I haven't myself seen any of the National Guard yet, but by late afternoon there were dozens of fire trucks, these enormous pieces of heavy machinery like the front-end loaders coming on trailers, some of them. They were all in position here in these side streets out behind where the trade towers stood not so long ago. And at first there was a bit of traffic jam out here and real gridlock as the men in charge of coordinating all of this effort tried to figure out how to get things into position. But that's all been cleared up pretty much now. They closed down the city completely. There's also no electricity here except for the floodlights they've brought in. But there's certainly no civilian traffic here, so they finally have that under control. Of course, there's a very grim job ahead.
A grim job indeed, and it could be weeks. Thank you, Bill Blakemore, for that report down from lower Manhattan near ground zero of this. The Navy's Atlantic Fleet has sent aircraft carriers, guided missile cruisers, and destroyers into the waters off New York City and Washington, D.C. The Navy has also deployed a warship to patrol off the coast of Seattle. ABC's Neil Karlinski is there.
In Seattle, a Navy frigate armed with anti-aircraft weapons steamed into position near downtown in Elliott Bay. Throughout this city, life as normal simply stopped.
They came on and said that they were evacuating and please leave immediately.
Downtown, several buildings were evacuated. Even the city's famous Space Needle was closed indefinitely for fear it too could be a target. Children were kept in school, but the day was anything but normal as the smallest of students tried to understand what was happening. On the water, ferry service, on alert for car bombs, stopped service to all but individual passengers.
I asked the American people to join me.
Many of those who saw the images before leaving for work this morning, like this woman, stayed home, disgusted by the pictures before them.
I just woke up to it. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe it. I have so many friends in New York, and it's just...
It's going to be a couple of minutes. We'll be over to help you, okay?
Others, desperate to help any way possible, simply flooded blood banks.
I had to do something.
For that report, we now have some home video, we are told, of the first plane hitting the first, you see it there, hitting the first tower at the World Trade Center. Cameras were, after this first explosion, cameras were trained on the Twin Towers when the second jet slammed into it. So that was the jet. The second, we've been seeing all day long, the second commercial jet slam into the second tower. That was just home video of the first one. We'll look at that one more time. You can see it heading straight for the tower. If we can re-rack that, please. Thank you. Home video just happened to be down there, happened to be rolling, and captured what is, even as we replay this, and we've seen this video twice. This video is the first time we're seeing this, but we've seen pictures, images of these jets crashing into the tower for hours now, and it is still an incredibly disturbing and upsetting sight to see. Again, those pictures just into our newsroom here of the very first wave of this unprecedented terrorist attack that has been launched here on the United States. We have been tracking this evening public reaction to the attacks throughout the day, and joining me now is ABC News polling director Gary Langer. What are you finding out as far as reaction? I mean, are people shaken, obviously disturbed and upset?
I think so. Elizabeth, at times of crisis, Americans tend to express both concern and resolve alike, if you will, and I think we're seeing both of those now. Nearly 9 in 10 Americans are worried about the chance of more major terrorist attacks of this nature. Indeed, half the public is very worried about it. Nearly half worry that they personally could be the victim of this kind of attack, or someone close to them maybe. Now, despite these concerns, we find that about 2/3 express at least some confidence that the government can deter or prevent these kinds of attacks, and 2/3 also express a willingness to suspend some personal liberties in order to help the fight against terrorism.
That's an interesting one, because we've been talking already with some of our other reporters around Washington, D.C., for example, earlier to Lisa Stark out in Seattle, Washington, about the fact that this could change the way Americans fly. We've all become very accustomed to checking luggage at curbs and dashing in and out of airports. Could we be looking at something like El Al security, and is the